Okay, so welcome back. Now today we're going to talk about something that you will find inside Excel, and it's called VBA. And it's basically a very nice and extremely functional programming language, an IDE, inside Excel that allows you to calculate and do a lot of very complex calculations on spreadsheet data. And as you can see here, we've got an application that we're going to look at later on that basically allows the user to input this equation, variables in this equation, which is just adding two sine waves, and you can specify the frequencies and the magnitudes and phase shift. And let me show you what it does. I click that button, it brings up what you may be familiar with if you do any Windows Forms applications, like C#. We've got a bunch of videos in this channel with talking about C# and Windows Forms applications, especially with engineering. And it allows the user to put in whatever we want for example, I'm changing the magnitude of the second wave, and I can change the frequency of the primary wave, sine wave, and hit plot, and you can see it automatically updates the waveform. And all of this was done in Excel in VBA. So if you're not familiar with VBA in Excel, you may be quite impressed at the functionality it has. Now we're also going to look at another application, which is this application here on a separate spreadsheet. And this is related to a C# Windows Forms series I did recently, where we basically make a logging application that takes the date, the time, and the indoor and outdoor temperatures and logs that every 5 minutes to a CSV file. Okay, so what this Excel VBA application is going to do is allow us to bring that CSV file into Excel. Here we've got the time of day, internal and external temperature, and if I click this update button, it's even going to allow me to go to open file dialog, as you may be familiar with in C# Windows Forms, select the data, and it will quickly and automatically update. It will fill in all the data, and it will update a chart. And here I've got about 2 days worth of, the blue is the indoor temperature, and the black or brown is or red is the outside temperature. And you can see it automatically gives me some summary data. There's 612 readings in this CSV file. Last entry was, here's the date and time, and it's 2.1 total days, and it also calculates the minimum and maximum temperature of all 612 readings, the maximum of the indoor and the outdoor. So really very functional, and this was all done in Excel in Visual Basic, VBA, that already comes with Excel. So we're going to talk about how to develop these applications, and we're going to cover a lot of ground. As you can see here, we needed to do an open file dialog, and we need to access a CSV, we need to access charts, we need to do a lot of different types of data access. And here we need to deal with trig functions and equations, and again with charts and plotting. So we're going to cover a lot of ground, and also we're going to look at optimizing this, because if you've ever worked in VBA in Excel, you're familiar with how slow things can be. So we're going to do a lot of work with optimizing this to make it as fast as what you saw. So let's start out and look at what really is VBA that's included in Excel. VBA is basically a programming language and an IDE, or an integrated development environment. If you've worked in C# Visual Forms, you know exactly what I'm talking about. VBA stands for Visual Basic for Applications, and it is included in Excel. Now, it is surprisingly very similar to C#. If you're familiar with BASIC or the old Fortran, I did a series on Fortran, and it basically is very similar to, I think, to C#, where, as you saw, we've got a Windows form, and it basically is software that you can write inside Excel that allows you to do some very complex things with your spreadsheet data. Now, however, there are some pros and cons to this, and you need to know about what they are. The VBA code syntax that you will be writing this code in may not match what you're used to in Excel. So if you've been working with Excel for a long time and you're familiar with, like, if you want to write an equation, you write equals min of the range of cells, it may not match exactly what you're going to use in VBA. So that's just a caveat you need to be aware of. But surprisingly, and very surprisingly, if you've never been inside Excel with this development environment, it has a built-in IDE, Integrated Development Environment, and it's very, very similar to Visual Studio. So if you've done like C# or other applications in Visual Studio, this might look very, very familiar to you. And this is something that if you're in Excel, you can start up this IDE and it will look like this, and it may look very familiar. Here I've got my code that I've written. I've got my Solution Explorer. It's not called that, but it's basically the Solution Explorer that's got your project and your worksheets and your code you wrote. And you've also got the properties down here where you can define properties of your forms or whatever aspects of your spreadsheet or whatever. So again, very, very impressive. It even has like locals down here where you can have it print out. As you step through your code, you can have it print out variables. Very, very similar to the Visual Studio IDE. Now, there are some big differences. Keep in mind, unlike C#, you are going to be interacting with a spreadsheet, all right? So a lot of the work you're going to be doing is not just writing code here. You're going to be having to access various ranges and select and deselect cells and rows and columns. So there's going to be a lot of work that you're going to have to do to access this data in the spreadsheet. So it's like C# with a whole bunch of other functionality to allow you to access your spreadsheet. You're going to get very familiar with the range command, which allows you to set the range of data in your spreadsheet that you want to interact with. And another big difference, out of the box, as you do VBA and you access and update spreadsheet cells and ranges, you may notice it is incredibly slow. And that's just out of the box. You may have like 1,000 row spreadsheet and you might want to do, calculations on that spreadsheet and update the data. It might take you minutes. You press the button and it might take you minutes, a minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes or half an hour to update all the cells. It can be extremely slow. Now, the good thing is, and we're going to talk about this, and I encourage you to stick around, we're going to talk about some very simple methods that you need to be aware of if you're going to be working with VBA and spreadsheets. Some very simple methods that can take your 5 minutes and bring it down to a second or 5 seconds to do your updates of your spreadsheet. So you need to be aware that unless you are aware of these other methods, this can be extremely slow. And another annoyance is if you're familiar with Excel and the functionality, like you're going to write in a cell, you want to have the minimum of a range of cells. You would say equals min colon or min parentheses, and you enter the range. You may not have the format or the same functions in VBA, okay? So you need to be aware of that. It's just not a copy and paste from your Excel knowledge into your VBA knowledge. It may be, but you just need to know that's not always the case. Now, the good thing is macros. And it's an absolutely wonderful thing you need to be aware of and you need to use a lot, in my view. What are macros? Well, let's say, for example, you've selected some data. Say you've selected all this data and you want to chart it and you want to insert a chart, but you don't know what is the code I need in VBA in order to insert that chart and have it select the active range that you've selected, say all of this data here. Well, what you can do is you can go into the IDE and you can start a macro. And all a macro does is it writes out in a separate file, and you can see the results here. As you do things, as you manually hit like insert and then chart, it will record each step that you do manually, and it will give you this result. And when you turn off the macro, you now have this recording, and it says, okay, active sheet.shapes.add chart select. That adds the chart, and it specifies the chart type, which is an XY scatter with lines and no markers, and it sets the source data. So it gives you the syntax of the code you need to do that function. Absolutely wonderful, very, very important. It'll keep you a lot of times from having to run around the internet and figure out how to do certain steps. So I'm a very strong advocate of using macros to help you to figure out how to write your VBA code. It may not always be perfect, but it's going to get you very close to where you need to go. Now, there's going to be syntax differences, okay? Let me give you, for example, if you're familiar with C#, and I assume many of our videos on this channel are dealing with C# and C++ and Fortran. For example, if you're familiar with C#, there's going to be some syntax differences, some significant ones. But again, this is, if you've been around software development for decades, as I have, you know that the differences between different software languages is evolutionary rather than revolutionary. They do the same thing. They've just got some syntax differences. Does it really matter? But for example, here's a list of some things you do in C# and the equivalents in VBA. So for example, you define scope in C# by the curly braces. Not in VBA. You have to write out the scope. For example, for an if statement, you have to write out an end if, and that defines the scope. For Booleans, you do a colon, equals equals in C#. No, in VBA you do a single equals. So that might be kind of confusing to you. String concatenation in C# is a plus. Not in VBA, it's a ampersand. To define a variable, so for example, if you want to say double X, no, in VBA it's dimension X as double, all right? Switch statements. In C# you have a switch case. Not in VBA, you have a select case and end select to define the scope. Data type, var in C#, not in VBA, it's variant. You type out variant. Data type, like a null in C#, no, it's a nothing in VBA. Class properties, and yes, they do have classes and objects. In C#, this dot specifies that you want to refer to the property in this class object. In VBA, it's a me, right? So just something, and this is just a small list. There's a bunch of other things, but you need to be aware that it's the same functionality, slightly different syntax. Now, some similarities that you may be amazed with. VBA has functions, methods, subroutines. And as we saw, it's got user forms. Arrays, it has arrays fixed and dynamic, as we're going to see they're very important in VBA to help you speed things up. It's got collections, it's got dictionaries. It even has events, like button click events. And it's got the standard loops, again, with different format or syntax. If, then, else, and end if. It's got a do until loop. It's got a for next. It's got a for each next, and so on. So it's got the basic looping functionality. Data types, it's got booleans, integers, long, single, double, decimal, date, string, etc. And as I mentioned, it's object-oriented. You got classes and objects with fields, properties, and methods. And you've got file access, as we showed before. It can do a open file dialog. And it's got a bunch of other functionality that, honestly, you may be very impressed with. Okay, so that's it for this one. In the next video, we're going to delve into writing a Visual Basic VBA application that does this. It allows you to calculate an equation where you can enter, you got a Windows Forms type window, you can enter in data and you can do plot. And then the next, after that, we're going to look at the bringing in the CSV data from this application and bringing the log data and plotting it. So anyway, I encourage you to stick around and watch the upcoming series. I hope this helps. Take care and have a really good day. Thanks.